He leaned in, kissed me, and this time it wasn't just a touch, but something long, warm, that made me shake. We went back to the blanket, lay down together, and his hand slipped under my shirt, but he stopped and asked, "You sure you want me to keep going, or should I wait?" Hey, my dear friends, in this story I'm going to tell you about how one summer flipped my life upside down. Get comfy, grab some coffee or tea, and hang on tight until the end. It's gonna get hot, I promise. I was 19 when I showed up in Fargo, North Dakota, to stay with my Uncle Kevin for a couple of months. He wasn't my real uncle, just an old family friend, but my mom always called him that. I'd just finished my first year of college in Minneapolis and needed a break from school. But within a few days, I knew this summer wasn't gonna be anything like I'd planned. Kevin lived in an old house on the edge of town, surrounded by fields and quiet. He was 45, tall, with short dark hair and hands that smelled like oil from his mechanic job. We clicked right away, eating pizza on the porch, riding bikes on dusty roads, chatting about random stuff. He was calm, confident, and had this vibe that made me feel at ease. But everything changed one evening, about a week after I got there. I was sitting in the backyard, alone, messing around with myself, thinking no one would see. It was personal, something I did to unwind after a long day. The sun was setting, the air was warm, and I was relaxed, not paying attention to anything around me. Then I heard footsteps, looked up, and saw Kevin standing right in front of me. He was staring at me, not looking away, and I realized he'd seen everything. My heart started pounding, my face burned, and I froze, not knowing what to say or do. "Didn't expect to catch you out here," he said, sitting down next to me on an old bench in the yard. His voice was steady, with a slight smile, like it wasn't a big deal. I mumbled something like, "Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking about stuff, nothing much." He nodded, looking at me closely, and asked, "You like spending time like that, huh?" The question threw me off, and I felt this mix of shame and curiosity tighten inside me. Sometimes, I guess, I managed trying not to meet his eyes. He leaned in a little closer and said, "You know, I like those moments too, when no one's around." His words hung there, and I suddenly got that he wasn't just teasing or joking with me. Something clicked between us, like he was telling me it was okay to not hide. "Let's go inside, talk properly," he added, standing up and nodding toward the house. I got up, my legs shaky, my head spinning with thoughts about what he meant. In the living room, he flipped on the light, grabbed 2 cans of cola from the fridge, and handed one to me. We sat on the couch and he asked, "You ever talk to anyone about this, about what you like?" I shook my head, my throat dry, and said, "No, it's not something you usually bring up, you know." He smiled, took a sip, and said, "Well, you can with me if you want, I'm not the type to judge." His look was warm, and I felt the tension inside me start to ease up. That night was the first time I realized I was drawn to him more than I wanted to admit. We finished our colas, laughed about some dumb stuff, but his words about those moments stuck with me. It was the start of something new, something that scared me and pulled me in all at once. After that night in the backyard, I couldn't stop thinking about what Kevin had said. We'd sat in the living room with our cola cans, and his words about those moments stuck with me all the next day. I woke up in the morning feeling like something had shifted between us, even though nothing big had happened yet. The sun was already high when I came downstairs to the kitchen, where Kevin was making breakfast, eggs and bacon. He looked at me, nodded, and said, "Slept okay after last night? No weird dreams, I hope?" My cheeks started burning again, but I nodded and mumbled, "Yeah, fine, didn't dream about anything strange." We ate in silence, just the sound of forks hitting plates, but the tension in the air was almost thick enough to touch. After breakfast, he suggested driving to his workshop to show me what he worked on in his spare time. I agreed because I wanted to spend more time with him and figure out what he meant yesterday. We hopped in his old pickup, and 20 minutes later, we were at a small garage on the edge of Fargo. It smelled like gasoline and metal, with tools and car parts scattered on the workbench. Kevin started talking about an old motorcycle he'd been fixing up for a couple of months. He showed me how he polished the parts and asked, "Want to try it yourself, or just watch how I do it?" I grabbed a rag and a piece of metal, feeling his eyes on me with every move I made. We worked side by side, almost brushing shoulders, and I realized I liked being that close to him. At one point, he put his hand on my shoulder to adjust how I held the tool and said, "Like this, it's better, feel the difference when you do it right?" His hand lingered a little longer than it needed to, and I felt warmth spread through my whole body. I nodded, not looking at him, and said, "Yeah, I think I get what you're saying now." He took his hand away, but stayed close, and the silence between us got heavier than before. Then he suddenly said, "You know, I like that you're not afraid to try new things." I turned to him, surprised, and asked, "You talking about the motorcycle or something else right now?" He smiled, looking right into my eyes, and said, "Both, I guess, you decide what matters more." My heart started racing because I knew he was hinting at yesterday and what he'd seen. We kept working, but I couldn't focus on the metal or the tools anymore. All I could think about was him standing there, his voice calm but carrying something deeper. A couple of hours later, we wrapped up, and he suggested checking out the shed behind the house when we got back. At home, he opened the shed door, flipped on the light, and showed me an old toolbox he'd collected over the years. "This is my spot, where I get away from everything," he said, sitting on a chair and looking at me. I sat down next to him, feeling that thing between us building again, and asked, "So what do you do when you're here alone relaxing?" He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Sometimes I just sit and think, sometimes I do stuff that helps me unwind." His words hung there, and I felt this tight mix of excitement and something else inside me. We were sitting close, and I noticed his knee brush mine, but he didn't pull away. That day ended with us just talking about random things, but I knew something had started between us, and there was no stopping it now. After that day in the shed, I started noticing Kevin looking at me longer than he used to. The next morning, we sat on the porch with coffee, and he seemed lost in thought while I tried not to stare at him too obviously. The sun was rising over the fields, the air still cool, but inside I was burning up with thoughts about him. He finished his coffee, set the mug on the railing, and said, "We're heading to the lake today. It's quiet, you'll like it there." I nodded, my heart speeding up, because it felt like more than just a casual trip. We piled into the pickup an hour later, and the drive to the lake took about 30 minutes. Fargo faded behind us, replaced by trees and narrow dirt paths leading to the water. When we got there, he parked by the shore where it was dead quiet, just birds chirping somewhere far off. The lake sparkled under the sun, and Kevin pulled a couple of folding chairs from the truck bed, setting them up by the water. We sat down, and he said, "I come here sometimes just to sit and think about stuff." I looked at him and asked, "What do you think about when you're out here alone?" He turned to me, his eyes serious, and said, "About what matters, the people around me, what I'm feeling inside." His voice was quieter than usual, and I felt that thing between us building again, like it did in the shed. We sat quiet for a couple of minutes, staring at the water, but then he reached out and touched my hand resting on the armrest. It caught me off guard, and I froze, feeling his fingers squeeze mine lightly before he pulled back. "Sorry, didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, looking away, but I shook my head and said, "It's fine, it didn't bother me, honest." After that, we went silent again, but the tension between us felt almost electric. I kept looking at his hands on his lap, thinking how much I wanted him to touch me again. A little later, he stood up, walked to the water, and called me over. "Come on, let's wade in, it's warm, don't be scared." I kicked off my sneakers, rolled up my jeans, and followed him, feeling the sand crunch under my feet. We waded in up to our knees, and he splashed me, laughing, "What, you awake now, or still sleepy from the coffee?" I laughed and splashed back, and we messed around like nothing serious was going on between us. But then he stepped closer, stopping a foot away, and said, "You know, I like having you around, it makes it easier to forget the crap." His face was serious, and his words hit me hard, tightening something inside. "I like being around you too," I said, looking him in the eye, and it was the first time I'd been that straight with him. We got out of the water, sat back in the chairs, and he handed me a towel from the truck to dry off. While I wiped my feet, he watched me and asked, "You ever feel like you can just be yourself with someone?" I nodded, my throat dry, and said, "With you, I think it's the first time I've felt that." He smiled but didn't say anything, just stared at the lake, and I thought that day changed something between us for good. When we got home, it was getting dark, and we sat in the living room watching some old movie on TV. But I couldn't focus on the screen because all I could think about was his hand on mine by the lake. That night ended quiet, but I knew we were both feeling the same thing, even if we weren't saying it out loud yet. After the lake trip, I started noticing Kevin acting a little different, like he was testing how I'd react. The next day, we were in the shed behind the house, sorting through old tools he wanted to fix up. The light from the lamp hit his face, and I caught myself staring at him way too long. He noticed, grinned, and said, "You're kinda quiet today, something up or you just tired?" I shrugged, trying to hide how much I was drawn to him, and said, "Nah, just thinking about stuff, nothing too serious." We kept working, but I could tell he was moving closer on purpose when he showed me how to hold the screwdriver. His shoulder brushed mine, and I felt this warmth spread across my skin, making my heart beat faster. At one point he stopped, looked at me and asked, "You okay with me being this close, or am I taking up too much space?" His voice was calm, but something in his eyes made it hard to look away. "I'm fine, actually like having you next to me," I said, feeling the words slip out before I could stop them. He nodded, set the screwdriver on the table, and said, "Good, 'cause I like it when you're here with me too." Then he stood up, walked to a shelf in the corner of the shed, and pulled out an old box full of random metal stuff. "Let's see what we can do with this, take our minds off things," he suggested, coming back with a small smile. We started digging through the box, and he told me where he got all these pieces, like he was trying to fill the quiet. But I still felt this thing hanging between us, something we weren't naming yet. Later, as the sun was setting, he suggested going out to the porch with some beers he grabbed from the fridge. We sat on the old chairs, looking out at the fields, and he suddenly said, "You know, it's been a while since I felt this comfortable with someone around." I turned to him, surprised, and asked, "Is that because of me, or just the mood you're in today?" He took a sip of beer, looked at me, and said, "Because of you, you make me forget all the junk in my head somehow." Those words stuck with me, and I felt this warmth spread through my chest from them. I took a sip too, staring at the sunset, and said, "Being with you makes things easier for me too, more than with anyone else." We sat quiet for a couple of minutes, but then he reached over and put his hand on mine, resting on the armrest, like he did at the lake. This time he didn't pull away right off, and I felt his fingers squeeze mine a little while we looked at each other. "You mind me doing this?" he asked softly, not breaking eye contact, and I shook my head, saying, "No, I like it, more than I thought I would." He smiled, took his hand back, but stayed close, and I knew we'd crossed some kind of line. We finished our beers, talking about random stuff, but I couldn't stop thinking about how his hand felt on mine. That night ended with us heading inside, and he said, "Good night, see you tomorrow, don't overthink too much." I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come because all I could think about was how much I wanted to be closer to him. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, but something deeper that scared me and pulled me in at the same time. I knew the next day would bring something new, and I was looking forward to it. The morning after that night on the porch, I woke up feeling like I couldn't keep pretending nothing was happening. Kevin was already in the kitchen, frying some toast, and the smell of bread filled the whole house as I came downstairs. He turned around, grinned, and said, "Thought you'd sleep till noon after that beer last night." I chuckled, rubbing my eyes, and said, "Nah, I'm good," just tossed and turned, thinking about stuff. He nodded, set a plate of toast on the table, and asked, "What about if it's not a secret, or is it personal?" I sat down, feeling my stomach tighten, and said, "About us, what happened yesterday, and how it all feels to me." His face got serious, he sat across from me, and looked at me like he'd been waiting for this talk. "I've been thinking about it too, won't lie, you're stuck in my head," he said, taking a bite of toast. We ate quiet for a couple of minutes, but I knew I had to say something or the silence would kill me. "You really okay with things changing between us?" I asked, looking straight at him. He put the toast down, wiped his hands on his pants, and said, "Not just okay, I like it, you being here and so open." His words took some weight off my shoulders, and I felt like I could breathe easier inside. Then he stood up, went to the sink, and suggested, "Let's head into town today, grab stuff for dinner, get some air." I agreed because I'd go anywhere with him just to keep this closeness going. We drove to Fargo in his pickup, and the trip only took 15 minutes, but I kept watching him while he drove. In the store, we picked up meat, potatoes, and a couple of beers, and he joked with the cashier like everything was normal. But as we walked to the truck, he stopped, turned to me and said, "You know, I'm glad you came here this summer for real." I smiled, feeling warmth in my chest, and said, "Me too, never thought it'd turn out like this." Back home, we decided to cook together, and he showed me how to cut potatoes, standing right next to me at the kitchen table. His hand brushed mine when he adjusted how I held the knife, and he didn't pull away like before. "You're picking this up fast, gonna outdo me soon," he said, smiling at me, and I said, "Only if you're here telling me how to do it better." We both laughed, but I saw his eyes linger on me a little longer than usual. While the meat cooked, we sat on the couch in the living room, and he turned on some old racing movie playing on TV. But I wasn't watching the screen because he was so close I could feel the heat from his shoulder through his shirt. At one point, he turned to me and said, "If anything bothers you, just tell me, I don't want to push you." I shook my head, my throat dry, and said, "I like it all, just don't know how to explain it to you." He nodded, put his hand on my knee, and said, "You don't need to explain, I can see what you're feeling already." His hand stayed there, and I didn't move it because it was the first thing I'd really wanted this whole time. We finished the movie, but I didn't catch what it was about since all I focused on was him. That night ended with us cleaning up the dishes and heading to our rooms, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. After that night with his hand on my knee, I woke up feeling like I couldn't keep everything bottled up anymore. Kevin was already in the shed when I stepped outside, and the morning air was fresh with the smell of grass. I found him there, fixing an old chair, sweat dripping down his forehead as he twisted screws. He looked at me, wiped his face with his sleeve, and said, "Up early, thought you'd want to sleep in another hour." I shrugged, leaned against the wall, and said, "Couldn't sleep, wanted to find you, talk about yesterday." He set the screwdriver down, sat on a crate, and asked, "About what exactly, the couch thing or something else?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest, and said, "Yeah, about you putting your hand there, and how I felt after it." He looked at me close, then stood up and stepped nearer, stopping a couple feet away. "Didn't mean to freak you out, just felt like you were okay with it," he said, holding my gaze. I took a step toward him and said, "You didn't, I liked it, more than I thought I would." Silence hung between us, but then he reached out and touched my shoulder, keeping his hand there. "You sure you want this, that we're heading somewhere good?" he asked quietly, and I felt the warmth of his palm through my shirt. "I'm sure, haven't felt anything this strong in a long time," I said, not looking away, and he nodded like he took it as truth. We stood like that for a couple seconds, and I noticed his breathing got a little deeper than usual. Then he pulled his hand back, turned to the table, and said, "Let's finish the chair, then go somewhere, clear our heads." We worked together, and I held the wood pieces while he fastened them, feeling him right there. When the chair was done, he slapped my back and said, "Did a good job, now we've earned a break, let's hit the river." We got in the pickup, and 20 minutes later, we were at a small river outside town, where the water flowed slow and quiet. We stepped out of the truck, sat on the grass by the bank, and he pulled 2 water bottles from a bag. "This place is good for thinking, away from everything," he said, handing me one, and I took it, nodding. We sat quiet, watching the river, but then I turned to him and said, "I keep thinking about you even when I try to focus on something else." He looked at me, smiled, and said, "Me too, you've gotten under my skin, can't shake it." His words caught me off guard, and I felt something flip inside me. He leaned closer, put his hand on my neck, and said, "If anything feels wrong, tell me, I'll stop, I promise." I nodded, feeling his fingers press my skin lightly, and said, "Don't want you to stop, I need this." We sat there, staring at each other, and then he moved even closer, our faces just inches apart. I closed my eyes, and he brushed his lips against mine, soft, just for a second, but it was enough to send heat through my whole body. He pulled back, looked at me, and asked, "You okay? Everything good after that?" I nodded, smiling, and said, "More than okay, wanted this for a while, didn't even know how." We stayed there a bit longer, holding hands, and I knew this was a moment I'd never forget. When we got home, it was getting dark, and he said, "Good night, see you in the morning, get some rest." I went to bed, but all I could think about was his lips on mine, and how much I couldn't wait for tomorrow. After that day by the river, I woke up feeling like everything between us had finally become real. Kevin was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee, and sunlight poured through the window as I walked downstairs. He turned, handed me a mug, and said, "Today's your last day here, let's make it something special." I nodded, my insides shaking from his words, and said, "Wanna spend it with you, don't need anything else." He smiled, set his mug on the table, and said, "Then let's go back to the lake where it all started." We packed up quick, grabbed some food for the road, and 30 minutes later, we were at that same lake where things kicked off. The water sparkled under the sun, and we spread a blanket on the grass, far from the road where no one could see us. He sat next to me, put his hand on my back, and said, "You know, didn't think this summer would give me this much until you showed up." I turned to him, feeling the warmth of his hand, and said, "For me too, it's more than I ever could have pictured." We ate sandwiches, talked about random stuff, but I saw his eyes change, get deeper somehow. Then he cleared the food away, moved closer, and said, "I want to be with you today for real if you're up for it." My heart started racing and I nodded, saying, "I'm up for it, want this more than anything, you don't even know." He took my hand, led me to the water, and we stood there, looking at each other, while the wind rustled the trees. He leaned in, kissed me, and this time it wasn't just a touch, but something long, warm, that made me shake. We went back to the blanket, lay down together, and his hand slipped under my shirt, but he stopped and asked, "You sure you want me to keep going, or should I wait?" I pulled him closer, feeling his breath on my neck, and said, "Don't wait, wanna feel you, nothing else matters." We stayed there, wrapped up in each other, and I knew this was our moment, just ours to keep. Time passed, the sun started setting, and we just held on to each other while the world got quieter around us. Then he sat up, looked at me, and said, "You're leaving tomorrow, don't know what's next, but this was real." I felt a lump in my throat, nodded, and said, "Real for me too, won't forget a second of what we had." We packed up, drove home quiet, and I thought about how much he'd changed my life this summer. At home, we sat in the living room, and he suddenly said, "If you ever want to come back, I'll be here, you know that." I looked at him, my eyes stinging, and said, "I'll come back, promise, this isn't the end for us." He hugged me tight, and we sat like that until the clock hit midnight. Then he walked me to my room, said, "Good night, take care in Minneapolis," and went to his. I got in bed, but sleep wouldn't come because all I could think about was his hands holding me by the lake. Next morning, I packed my stuff, he drove me to the bus, and we said goodbye with just a handshake, but I knew it wasn't over. Sitting on the bus, I stared out the window and realized this summer with Kevin would stay with me forever. Have you ever had a summer that changed your life, or someone you'll never forget? Drop in the comments what you think about our ending. Should I have stayed with Kevin or left? Would you risk everything for feelings like this if you were in my shoes? Can't wait to hear your stories and thoughts. Share away.